We'll get a 90-second response from each candidate. Peter will ask some questions, I'll ask some questions, we'll try to take some notes and make this thing work. So let me introduce to you the incumbent City Council member in District 1, Robert Wittenstein, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Dick, and by the way, I like the bow tie. It's very nice. My name is Robert Wittenstein. I am currently on the Dunwoody City Council. I've served for the last 3.5 years. Before that, I was one of the folks working to create the city. I am really proud of what we've accomplished over the last 3 years. The most important of our accomplishments, I think, is that we have put the city's finances on a sound financial footing. And I'm getting some feedback, so let me get a little further away. We have shown fiscal responsibility in being able to generate surpluses each year without raising taxes, and we are on track to do that again next year. So I am glad you're here tonight. I look forward to speaking with you.
Thank you, Robert. And next is Terry Nall.
Thank you, Dick. My name is Terry Nall, as you heard. Wow. And just so you know, the lights are so bright, we can't see anybody.
Yeah,
we're blinded up here. But I am the president of the U.S. insurance subsidiary for Deutsche Bank here in the U.S. The differentiation that I bring today is executive and financial leadership from my business and CPA experience. It's also the distinction of a different set of lens that I see items here in Dunwoody. One, the CPA I mentioned, and the conservative financial expertise I bring. I bring a belief that this is about other people's money, and I would want to see that on council. I bring, through my lens, a sense of disciplined spending and a sense of needs versus wants. I also am unfazed by a sense of urgency. I am unfazed by what has been called a shopping spree by some. I believe in accountability, and we are ready as a city for that accountability. I will ask the tough questions. I believe it's time for a change. Thank you.
And Jerry, we can't see.
Just out of curiosity, can you guys see?
We can't see. I just saw her. But we got to get some light on Jerry there so we can see her or something. We can't. All we can see is bright lights.
The lights are so bright.
Yeah.
Everything is dark. We can't see anything.
You want to come? You want to come?
Am I stand up?
No, just over there in the corner.
Yeah, right. If you go sit next, let's go sit
What if
in
you
front of.
switch seats here?
Yeah, yeah.
No, why don't you switch? Would you mind moving? Because you're right in the light. If you would move maybe to where she was sitting, then I think they can see her. By the way, our timekeeper tonight is Vanna White. No. Many of you know Jerry Penn, who was a stalwart of the Dunwoody North neighborhood and the Dunwoody Homeowners Association. Jerry is wielding a mean yardstick tonight. That's what that is. So we'll try and stay on time here. All right, Rick Callihan, you have your minute.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for coming out tonight. It feels great to be here amongst fellow residents, especially residents who have taken a keen interest in the political future of the city here. A little background about myself. I grew up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, what used to be the heart of steel country. My father was a steel worker for 35 years. And a few things that my dad taught me was to work hard, save money, and never get a job in a steel mill. So I think I've honored him on all three of those points. For the past 10 years, I've been the managing partner in a small business. In this position, I've gained what I call real-world experience in forecasting, marketing, and most importantly, budgeting. I have a few employees and their families depend on the decisions that I make as a business owner. And I'm going to bring those skills to City Council hopefully in January. Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. I'm going to ask the first question, and the rules on that are you get a 90-second response. You know that. And the first question does go to Rick Callihan. And this is all by the draw. There's no setup here. Peter and I have talked, and I've called in my kitchen cabinet. And we think that the biggest issue facing Dunwoody is density, especially multifamily homes. And I wonder, Rick, if you believe the City Council has positioned itself to adequately protect against higher densities that I suspect most residents don't want.
Okay. I think in the next few years, as the economy improves, there's going to be a lot of worthwhile projects brought before council. Some of these projects will involve what they term mixed use. Some of them will involve high density residential, whether it's flats or high story stuff. Every one of these will have to be looked at and examined on an individual basis to come out and say we can never build another apartment. How many jobs would that cost us? That's what we need to review. I think what's key here is maintaining the current balance that we have in the perimeter business district of jobs per resident. That's key. We can't increase density without bringing in the jobs. Currently right now I think it's about 9.25 jobs for every apartment in the perimeter. I like to keep it that way. My biggest concern regarding density is what's termed the transit-oriented development, the TOD, which is the plan is it's a federal program in conjunction with MARTA and some private groups where you build up high density around a MARTA station. And as part of that program, it requires high density, of course, and the fault with that program when you take in the federal money with MARTA is 20% of the apartments in these units are required to be what they call low-income working class. And that's where I have the problem. I'm not in favor of any high density. I'm not in favor of the TODs.
All right, thank you, Rick. And Terry, I'm sorry, Robert, you get your shot.
I'm glad to do it, but my scorecard says Terry's next.
It does? Oh yeah, I'm sorry, Terry.
Thank you. Happy to go next. We have a race underway here in Dunwoody. It's unfortunate that the economy has been in a lull that's affected so many of us, but it's also kept a lot of these developments at bay. The PCID reports that there are 5,400 multifamily housing units on the books, but are on hold at present. They also predict that an additional 5,100 multifamily units in the PCID will be on demand over the next 10 years. The race that we have about that is that in the next 2 years, this next council, will rewrite the entire zoning code from the ground up. And we have to insist on the best zoning tools that we can employ to try to moderate and balance the multifamily housing and all the other development, because development is more than just housing. It's commercial development as well, and it's also more than just the perimeter area. So the next council needs to be the folks that are laser-like focused on bringing moderated growth to Dunwoody. We need commercial growth to help us with our revenue, our tax base. That generates a large piece of the revenue and helps keep our homeowner property taxes as low as they are. So, and that's what I bring to council.
All right, thank you, Terry. Robert, you're right. You're a detail guy, you get the last word.
All right, at least on this one. One of the main reasons that we created the city of Dunwoody was because of our dissatisfaction with the amount of apartments that were being built and our sense that it was out of control. And we need to keep that sense of focus. The nice thing about the current economic conditions is that many of the elaborate plans that were put up before DeKalb County are now way too elaborate. The developers are going to come back and they're going to scale back because you can't get the loans that you could have gotten, the values aren't there anymore. So we are actually going to be in a position of strength when the economy picks up. And as these developers come to us and say, you know, that vacant piece of land next to Perimeter Mall, we want to develop on it, we're going to be able to say, yeah, you can do that, but here's some things we want. We want those towers half as tall. We want fewer units. We want more green space. And our role as council is to make sure that as the development occurs, it's something that the entire community is interested in, anxious to have, and will enjoy having as part of our city.
Thank you, Councilman Wittenstein, and turn it over to my friend Peter Cox.
Good evening. Well, in November, you're going to be sharing the ballot with 2 parks bonds. And I'd like to know if you personally support these bonds, and if they are both to fail, how you'd address the city's parks.
And Terry, you respond.
Oh, that's right.
Great. I'm delighted to be one of the approximate 7,000 people that will be casting a vote on the park referendum, the park bond referendums on November 8th. I personally have issues with the bonds. I feel like it's too much, too soon. It will result in a millage rate increase of 55%, and I'm unhappy with that. The amount of debt of $66 million is over 3 times our current 2011 operating revenues. I would have liked to have seen a smaller bond issue itself. And more importantly is there's no specificity with these bonds. And I would pledge that any future bond issues that might come before this council to take to the people that we have specificity with it. As far as if both bonds fail, I do believe that we should fund our parks incrementally through the annual budgets. We've witnessed, yet this is the 3rd of 3 years, we'll have surpluses. We've had some windfalls from host taxes, other kinds of things that have come in. And I think our priorities need to be funded more aggressively, and I would include in that funding for the parks. It does trouble me that even with this year's surplus, we could have easily have taken some of these issues in the Parks Master Plan. We could have checked off 1 or 2 or 3 of these issues with the surplus, and that is not on the table to be considered by this council.
Robert?
I was one of the folks who put forward the current design to split the Parks Bond referendum into 2. The original proposal was one big Parks Bond referendum, and I asked that we split it in 2 because I think the residents of Dunwoody have some important decisions to make on what we need to do now and what we can wait on. From my point of view, the more short-term need is for us, and again, let me do a caveat here. I am talking now as a resident of Dunwoody and a candidate and not as a city councilman. The city council, the government officials are prohibited from advocating for or against any ballot measure. But as a resident, I'm entitled to give you my opinion, so that's what you're going to get. I think the thing that strikes me as being a more near-term need is the need to acquire property while property prices are low and while interest rates are low. I think we have plenty of time to develop those properties. I'm impatient to get it all. I'd love that, but I don't know that I love it enough to borrow the money to do it now. But for me, this is about being able to secure property now for our children and our grandchildren.
Go ahead, Rick.
Splitting the 2 bonds up, in regards to the land acquisition bond, the big concern I have with that is taking large parcels of land off the tax rolls. When you take an O&I property that 5, 10, 15 years from now could be home to a large corporation with lots of paying jobs, and take that away from the private sector and off the tax rolls, I have a concern about that. If you have a blighted property in some situation, and you want to buy the land through that, you want to acquire the land through different methods, it's possible. But I'm totally against taking land off the tax rolls, especially stuff that's currently zoned office and industrial use. The big fear is if the acquisition bond passes and the improvements part doesn't, and we spend, the maximum amount of money, we spend whatever it is, $33 million on a bunch of land, it's going to sit vacant for who knows when. And did we really do anything of benefit to community if we take this down? Because that bond can only be used to acquire the land, not to improve the land. In regards to the Parks Improvement Plan, my issue with that one is no specificity. I mean, I talked to a couple of moms last weekend and they said they were very in favor of the program, of the Parks Plan, because They couldn't wait for their kids to play on the sports fields at Brook Run. And I remind them there's no such thing in the entire master parks plan. There are no fields whatsoever. There's no specifics whatsoever in the plan. And if on council, I would work to come back next year with a better plan.
Thanks, Mr. Callihan. Robert Wittenstein, this question goes to you. How's that? Does that come up? I'm not controlling it. It's being controlled by the magic hand. So far doing a great job. How do we, I want to go back to multifamily housing. The city of Chamblee has controlled apartment development by building codes, by insisting on substantial means of construction rather than the typical suburban apartment complex that you see. As you know, the city is, one of the reasons we became a city was that loophole in the O&I that Bob Lunston finally closed. But Chamblee went a different direction, and Robert, I'd like to know your opinion on that, especially as we have these huge complexes like High Street with thousands of apartments coming on.
Yeah, the tools that Chamblee is using are really very powerful, and we ought to look at using tools like it. What they insist is that you upgrade your materials and you install all of the safety and all of the durability things that drive up the price, but they also drive up the value. And what you end up with is apartments that rent for more. And that's good for us. You know, that brings in folks who can pay those higher rents. So that's it's a very legitimate technique, and often you can get developers to agree to do that in exchange for concessions that they often want us to make. In other words, when a developer comes in, there's often a lot of give and take before the building permits are issued, and that's the time for us to work with the developers to make sure that we get the development that we want.
Okay, Rick?
In the southeast, regarding no matter what type of material you use to build an apartment building, it's not going to go up in value. As soon as something new comes up, the rents are going to spiral with the one that you just built 2 years ago, and that's the problem. Something I was disappointed on with the current council was not taking up the issue of impact fees. I think impact fees is an excellent use, an excellent way to help control development of the apartments. It was taken off the table. I think they tried to bring it up twice, and it was tabled for whatever reason until a future date, maybe till next council. But going back to the parks and how you can tie that in, let's say, for example, a development like High Street. If City Council next week were to impose a $500 impact fee on new apartments, and that money would have to be used for some sort of infrastructure, and that money could be used to develop a park in the perimeter. Most of the cost of an impact fee is going to be taken upon by the apartment development. There'll be some shared costs by current residents, but I think impact fees is the way to go in restricting new developments.
Thanks, Mr. Callihan. Terry?
Thank you, Dick. A little more on the Chamblee standards. They deal with the construction standards, and in the absence of construction standards, you end up with apartments or multifamily housing with sticks and bricks. And what we need is a higher construction standard of concrete, steel, and stone, so that we get a much higher quality unit, we get a much higher cost unit. It's a different demographic that comes in with that, and that has worked very well for Chamblee. But Dick, we shouldn't stop just with looking at Chamblee. We should look at best practices at a lot of other cities. We have a narrow window in the next 2 years to get this right when we rewrite the zoning code, and it will control the destiny of Dunwoody for decades to come if we don't get it right. I agree with Rick. We should continue exploring the impact fees. We should look at height restrictions that go with this. And again, the best practices of other cities, because let's don't stop with just one neighboring city, but we have to get it right. We have a limited window with the zoning railway. We have to get it right. Decades to come, your grandchildren will either benefit or be the victim of whatever happens with the zoning rewrite.
Peter, will you forgive me? I want to ask a
Sure.
follow-up to that, if it's prerogative here. Robert, has the City Council ever discussed construction standards on apartments?
Mike.
His question was, has the City Council ever discussed construction standards for apartments? And the answer is we have. Today what we've passed is the Georgia Standard Building Practices Manual. So that is the industry best practice. It's there's engineers who establish how often you need to have fire hydrants and how often you need to have smoke detectors and what kinds of building materials. It forms as the basis for development, and it's the standard that builders have to adhere to for any place in the state. But there are opportunities for us to set higher standards. That just sets the floor. It doesn't set the ceiling.
Okay, thanks. Anybody want to respond to that?
Well, I think that highlights the need that we need tighter standards and higher construction standards so that we get a higher quality unit. Just going to the Georgia standards is not enough, and that's why we have the sticks and bricks that we see today.
All right, thank you. But by the way, professionally, I should be calling everybody Mr. But you know, we're the kind of city that I talk to these guys all the time. It's kind of hard for me to say Mr. Nall. You know, when
It's okay, Dick.
it's, Robert, you agree?
Mr. Williams?
Okay, absolutely.
Go ahead, Peter.
Okay, Mr. Cox?
Rick, this question is for you. Many candidates have said they'd like to see a stronger focus on economic development, and I'd like to know what steps the city should take to attract more businesses.
One of the first things I would recommend is, of course, not having the city buy all the O&I property that's out there. But more importantly, I would like to see a new overlay district for the perimeter business district that would allow them to have their own sign ordinance. I know it sounds like a very minor thing, but when you attend city council meetings, and any of these guys will tell you, signage is important to businesses. It's how they get their name out there. It's how they attract customers. They want to have their name on the marquee. They want to let people know where they are. And right now, the rules are the same there they are as in other parts of the city. One of the first things would be definitely creating a new overlay district in the perimeter, allowing for a new sign ordinance for that area. In addition to that, I think we need to look and see how the chamber can work in cooperation with our economic developer and make sure that he has all the tools he needs to attract new jobs. Keeping the taxes low, I mean, obviously that's important as well. Our tax is a little bit lower than Sandy Springs currently. Sandy Springs has impact fees, but businesses still are building there. I drove by Costco and I see a big crane up there. There's lots of buildings going up over there. I like to see some of that activity over here in Dunwoody.
Thanks. Terry?
It's a very good question because I'm from Greensboro, North Carolina, was very active in the chamber there. And we did some things there that worked very successfully. Let me go back though and say, what's one of the reasons that a company locates where they do? The perimeter is a high demand location for a lot of the same reasons that we like it. Big city opportunity without actually being in the big city. But one of the reasons a company locates here is that the CEO and the CEO's spouse envisions themselves living here. If they can't envision themselves living here and having the quality of life that they would like to have, that company will not be located here. That it increases the odds it will not locate here. So one of the best things that we can do is get back to our priorities, and our priorities start with our streets, start with fixing our intersections so that traffic is not backed up endlessly, and that takes resources that we need to prioritize. That's item number one. Number two is we can create with the chamber and the economic development director an ambassador team so that when folks are here on site visits, we've got a team of folks that are passionate about Dunwoody to show them the quality of life here in Dunwoody, and that enhances the package that we offer with that.
Speaking of Rick, before you answer.
Yeah.
Or is Robert, is that it? Yeah, it is Robert, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's a question from the audience. Would you consider four-laning Mount Vernon and other roads? I just think, can you just give a unanimous no?
That's an unanimous no.
Okay, all right. Go ahead.
Actually, I shouldn't speak for them.
Well,
I would certainly never do that.
I'd agree. I don't think that widening road's a great idea.
Yeah.
No, not 4-lane. The increasing the capacity will bring more cut-through traffic, in my opinion, when the word is out.
You know,
we do need some limited left turn lanes to help relieve some of that congestion.
Yeah.
So some of that congestion are cars waiting to turn left, and it blocks the roads.
Well, you know, the first commandment of Dunwoody is apartments, and the second commandment is 4-laning. So I just wanted to get that on the record. All right, Robert, go with your.
And the third one is don't touch my trash. Economic development, it's really 4 things for us guys. One is we are one of the few cities our size that has an economic development director. Michael Starling is his name. He is a fabulous resource for us, and he is doing a great job. And just having somebody in the city working on economic development every day gives us a leg up on many of the other cities around. So that was a great first move. The second thing, and it's not directly within the city's control, but it's the most important thing, and that's the schools. If we have good schools, people will want to live here and companies will want to move here. So as civic leaders, even if it's not on the city council's agenda, the schools need to be one of our primary concerns every single day. The last 2 things are well within our control, and that is our streets have to look good. We have to have paved streets. The traffic has to move, but we got to have parks. We got to have places for this. Has to be a community where people want to raise families.
All right, thanks, Robert. Now we turn now, I think we're about on time, to where the candidates ask each other questions, and we set this up this way. Robert Wittenstein will ask Terry Nall or Rick Callihan 1 question, and the person who's asked the question will have 90 seconds to respond. But we can freewheel this if we want a little bit. So Robert, your question to Terry Nall or Rick Callihan.
Yeah, I'll ask Terry the question. Terry, in the 4 months that you've been running for office, you have talked very differently about your views on the parks referendum, and I'm wondering whether we should believe what you started with or what you're saying today.
Well, Robert, that's easy to answer because that's simply not true. In Mr. Williams' crier back in June, I had an op-ed piece where I said that the parks plan was not fiscally conservative, and I said tonight that the parks plan, I have an issue with the bonds, that it's too much debt. That was in my op-ed piece. I looked at surrounding cities here of Dunwoody, and I took a look at what's the revenue of the city, what's the debt of the city. And the surrounding cities, the debt was much less than the annual income of the city, of the general fund. Here in Dunwoody, our debt would be 3.5 times what that annual income is. So I've been very consistent in my view, Robert. It is not a fiscal conservative plan. Let me just also give you kind of an example of that. Not all of the features that are in the plan have been fully vetted. One in particular that really strikes a chord with me are water features, $500,000 of water features. And we've all, if you've been to Brook Run, you've seen how the water features get clogged and stop working. And that increases the annual maintenance costs that we're going to have to expend from tax dollars to have those kinds of features in the parks plan. There is room for a parks plan, but not this one, not these bonds.
All right, Terry, take a deep breath because you can now ask a question of Robert or Rick.
Great. I think I'll go with Robert.
What a surprise.
That's right. So Robert, how can you call yourself a taxpayer's friend when in last November's election, November 2010, you actively campaigned against the Dunwoody property tax freeze homestead exemption that was secured by our esteemed Fran Miller after he worked so hard to pass it through the General Assembly for us here in Dunwoody, and which also put you on the opposite side of the 80% of Dunwoody citizens who disagreed with you and voted not to increase their property taxes. And by the way, thank you for that vote.
Thanks, Terry, for the question. So he's absolutely right. I did advocate a no vote there. And for me, this is a fairness issue. What we did in that election was that we lowered our taxes at the expense of newcomers. What we've said is that our assessments will be frozen until we sell our houses, and then the folks who move in will pay higher rates of taxes. And my sense was then and is now that if you've got two houses sitting side by side worth the same amount, they ought to be paying their same fair share of the taxes. So I can understand the desire for us to say no more taxes, not me, but I don't think that that's actually a recipe for creating a community where everybody feels equally vested. So for me, this is not so much about whether your taxes are higher or lower. We get to set the millage rate. And if we want them lower, all we have to do is to reduce the level of service. But if we're going to have an elevated level of service, I think we need everybody to contribute equally and equitably to pay for that.
Rick Callihan, you're up. You can ask either one a question. I think I know where you're going.
Well, I'll go with Robert as well, I guess.
I got the target on.
Robert, earlier this year, the Perimeter Business District, they presented their LCI plan, their Livable City Initiative, which is basically the blueprint of future development and growth in that area. You voted in support of that particular document. In that document, one of the main focus was the development of the top, the high-density MARTA development that I spoke about earlier. And also in that document, they discussed the desire for 5,100 apartments over 10 years, and also discussed perhaps 18,000 apartments over the next 25 years. During that discussion, I went back and watched the video, read through my notes. There was no opposition to those figures on your part. The only thing that I recall on your part was the density. They wanted to reduce the density from 9.25 down to 5, and your idea was to increase the density but only go 9.5 to 7. And I want to know how does that benefit the homeowners in the schools of Dunwoody?
Yeah, okay. You're absolutely right. I did support the LCI. I would encourage any and all of you to go out and read it. I think it's a well-done document. I think the Perimeter Center folks have tried to look over the next 10 and 20 years and have tried to figure out how we can improve the livability of that part of Dunwoody. So I did support it. We have to be careful, though, and not misrepresent what's in there in terms of number of units. What they talk about is that based on their analysis of the market, there is demand for a certain number of units based on our location and based on the conveniences of shopping and work. We have control over how many of those units can be built. So they can say, yes, we think, based on looking at Buckhead and looking at Alpharetta and looking at all these other places, that we see demand over the next 20 years for X number of new units. That demand only gets satisfied if we allow the zoning that puts it in place. So yes, I think it's a well-done document. I'd encourage you to read it, but by supporting it, we aren't giving anybody permission to build any apartments.
All right, thank you, Robert. Time for closing statements, and the order is Rick Callihan, then Robert, and then Terry Nall. Robert, you know, being the incumbent in a brand new city, you are the piñata, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Rick, you're up.
Sure, thank you. First, I would like to thank you two guys over there. I'd like to thank everyone out for coming out here this evening. In the past 3 years, the city of Dunwoody, we've gone from a startup to an established city. And I think for the most part, I'm very pleased with a lot of things that have been done by the current council and the mayor. This year, we do have a budget surplus of a couple $1 million just want to be clear that that budget surplus mainly is a result of DeKalb County making a decision to change how they allocate the host funds. So we hear about a couple $1 million surplus. That's because the city was allocated more funds out of the host funds. So I want to clear that up. In the past few years, we've seen $100,000 spent on branding, a Dunwoody billboard on the interstate, $150,000 for signs and monuments around the city, and now talk of $70,000 for a temporary ice rink over in Dunwoody Village. These are not expenses don't think we should be making during these serious financial times here in Georgia and in the world abroad. I strongly feel we need to build up our cash reserves and continue to pave our streets and put in sidewalks across the city. We have major traffic issues in some intersections, and there's some crosswalks needed. These are the types of areas where I like to see the money allocated that we have. Every 2 weeks, the council gets together to make some very tough decisions, whether it's policy or spending issues. I'm confident that I'm the person on this up here tonight that will do the best job over the next 4 years at those council meetings. I ask everyone here this evening to consider voting for me. I'd also like to thank Ms. Elaine Boyer, DeKalb County Commissioner, for a recent endorsement, and also Ms. Nancy Jesser received her endorsement recently as well, our school board member. And I'd like to thank all the supporters I've had out there. And finally, I want to thank Mr. Wright, and I can't call him Mr., but Danny Ross, for their past years of service as well. Thank you.
Okay. Robert.
Yeah, I'll start by thanking my wife. This is a tough job, and it requires an enormous amount of energy, and without the support of my family, it would be impossible to do. But I'm looking forward to the opportunity to do it for 4 more years. After 3 years of keeping our collective promises, which was to bring up a city on a sound financial footing, to keep taxes low, to create a level of service that we could all be proud of, I think I've earned your support, and I ask for your vote on November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And Terry, before I go to you, you are aware that Robert's wife, Susan, is a Tar Heel fan? Terry's kind of a Wake Forest.
He's Wake Forest.
I'm a Wake Forest fan, but I'm delighted when I moved here with my employer, and Jerry, don't start the clock yet. I was delighted that I was still in ACC country, so thank you. Now you can start. I echo all the thanks that we have here for you all coming out on what could have been a very yucky night. That's a technical term, you know. And thanks also to my family for allowing me for all of the volunteer time that I've given to Dunwoody in my 13 years here. And I do thank the existing council for being founding fathers of Dunwoody. A lot of work went into startup. That was then, this is now. What Dunwoody needs going forward is different than what we needed for the last several years. We have a professional staff that needs direction and accountability. We need leadership on council that will be policy setters and that will provide accountability for that professional staff. This is a 4-year term going forward. The term is longer than we've actually been a city, and we can ill afford new distractions like chickens, like how many cars are in your driveway at any point in time, like whether your grass is 10 inches high or 7 inches high or something in between. The 2 most important things of this election will be the zoning code rewrite, which I mentioned earlier. We need our very best tools to limit that growth, to demonstrate that we have control of development and developers and not the other way around. We also need a detailed plan. Whether the bonds pass or fail, we need a detailed plan with specificity so that the bonds can be issued appropriately, correctly, and with the least amount of cost to you, the taxpayer, because it's your money, it's other people's money, whether it's bond money or whether it comes from the annual operating budget. I am a CPA. I'm conservative. I bring that conservative financial expertise here. I run a business. It's actually my second business that I've run. I believe it's time for a change. I believe I'm the right choice for that change. I ask for your vote on November 8th, and I ask for your neighbors' vote, and I hope you will turn out and encourage your neighbors to come with us. Thank you again.